"Captain, salute me now, or your career is over." The general's voice thundered across the parade ground. But Captain Evelyn Reed stood motionless, her defiance a silent declaration of war against the decorated monster before her. The air at Fort Carson, Colorado, was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine from the distant Rocky Mountains that serrated the horizon. The sunlight wasn't the humid, heavy blanket of the South. It was a blade, glinting off the polished brass and service ribbons of the assembled soldiers. On the main parade ground, hundreds of men and women in their dress uniforms stood in perfect formation, a testament to discipline and order. Yet at the center of it all, that order was about to shatter. Captain Evelyn Reed, at 30 years old, was the picture of a model officer. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a flawless bun, so tight it seemed to defy gravity. But a single, stubborn wisp had escaped, clinging to her temple like a rebellious thought. It was the only outward sign of the tempest raging within her. Her hands, steady and gloved, remained locked at her sides. Her gaze, the color of a stormy sky, was fixed on the man standing before her, General Sterling. He was a man carved from granite and ambition. His silver hair was immaculate, his face a mask of chiseled authority. On his hand, a large, gold signet ring seemed to absorb the light, a stark contrast to the medals that adorned his chest. Medals that, to Evie, represented a legacy of lies. He had just presented her with a commendation for valor, and now, protocol demanded a salute. It was a simple gesture, one she had performed thousands of times. But today, it was an impossible one. "Captain Reed, did you hear me?" General Sterling's voice dropped, becoming a low, menacing growl that cut through the crisp air. He took a half-step closer. The crowd, a mix of soldiers and their families, began to murmur. Cameras that had been raised to capture a moment of pride now remained up to document a spectacle of insubordination. The wind whipped a nearby flag, the sharp snap, snap, snap of the fabric sounding like gunshots in the tense silence. Sterling's aide, like a nervous major, shifted his weight. He could feel the career-ending gravity of the moment. He saw the confusion on the faces of Evie's fellow officers, the disappointment in the eyes of the senior NCOs who had mentored her. They saw a brilliant career imploding in real time. They saw a decorated captain inexplicably throwing it all away. Evie felt their eyes on her, a physical weight of judgment. But it was nothing compared to the weight of the promise she carried. The parade ground, this sacred patch of earth where honor was supposed to be absolute, felt like a battlefield. Sterling tapped his signet ring against the podium, an impatient, rhythmic tick that grated on Evie's nerves. It was the sound of a predator growing tired of the game. "This is your final warning, Captain," he said, his voice loud enough for the front rows to hear clearly. "You will show respect. You will honor this uniform, or you will be stripped of it before sundown." The threat hung in the air, sharp and cold as the mountain peaks behind them. But Evie didn't flinch. To salute this man would be to desecrate the very honor he claimed to represent. It would be a betrayal of the one man whose respect she had spent her entire life trying to earn back from the grave. As she stood frozen in defiance, the present faded and the past rushed in with the force of a tidal wave. She was no longer on the parade ground. She was a teenager again, standing in the suffocating silence of her family's living room. The air was thick with a shame so profound it felt like it was stealing the oxygen from her lungs. Her father, Colonel Nathan Reed, had been her hero, a man of quiet integrity and unwavering principle, with a kind smile that could light up a room and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 battles. He had served for 24 years, a career marked by distinction and the deep respect of his men. And then came Operation Crimson Sand. It was a name whispered in classified briefings, a ghost mission in the desolate Cadora Valley that had gone catastrophically wrong. Men were lost. Objectives failed. A scapegoat was needed. And Colonel Sterling, as he was then, was an ambitious officer who knew how to survive. He knew how to redirect blame with surgical precision. Evie remembered the night the charges were laid. Her father paced the floor, his uniform seeming to hang off his frame, suddenly too large. He maintained his innocence, his voice steady as he explained the doctored intelligence, the orders that were changed at the last minute. But he was explaining it to a system that had already decided his fate. Sterling had built a fortress of lies, and her father was left outside its walls, alone. The court-martial was a blur of public humiliation. She watched as her hero, a man who had dedicated his life to his country, was branded a failure, a disgrace. They stripped him of his rank, his pension, his honor. She remembered his hands, the same strong hands that had taught her how to ride a bike and tie her shoes, shaking as he unpinned his insignia for the final time. He folded his uniform with the same meticulous care he always had, but it was a funeral rite. He never recovered. The betrayal had poisoned him from the inside out. He died 3 years later. A heart attack the doctors attributed to stress and a spirit broken by injustice. On his deathbed, his voice was a fragile whisper, but his eyes were clear. He gripped her hand. "Not for revenge, Evie," he'd said, his breath rattling in his chest. "For the truth. Make sure the truth has its day." She enlisted a month after his funeral. Every promotion, every commendation, every grueling day of service was a silent tribute to him. She drove herself with a relentless determination, proving to the world and to herself that the name Reed was synonymous with honor. All the while, she dug. For 12 years, she quietly investigated, using her clearance and connections to pull at the threads of the conspiracy. She found old communications, transfer orders for the real guilty parties, and quiet testimony from soldiers who knew the truth but were too afraid to speak. She was building a case, piece by painful piece, to honor her father's last wish. And the architect of it all, the man who had climbed the ladder of her father's ruin, was now standing before her, demanding a salute. The memory receded, leaving the cold reality of the parade ground in its wake. General Sterling's face had morphed from impatience to a mask of cold fury. The public challenge to his authority was intolerable. He decided to make an example of her. "It seems Captain Reed is unwell," Sterling announced, his voice laced with a false, condescending pity that was far more insulting than pure anger. He turned slightly, addressing the senior officers in the front row as if Evie were a specimen under a microscope. "This is a sad display. It's a tragic example of how standards have declined. We push for diversity and inclusion, and sometimes we overlook fundamental issues of character and mental stability." The words were a volley of poison darts. He was questioning her sanity, her fitness for command, in front of everyone she had ever led or served alongside. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mixture of shock and confusion. Her colleagues, the same men and women who had trusted her with their lives in the field, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. She could see them physically distancing themselves, a subtle shuffle of feet, a slight turning of shoulders. An invisible quarantine was being erected around her. She was becoming a contagion. A young lieutenant in the crowd pulled out his phone, his movements furtive but unmistakable. He began recording. The screen's glow was a tiny beacon signaling that this moment of personal crisis was now public content, destined to be shared, judged, and dissected by strangers. The humiliation was no longer confined to Fort Carson. It was about to go viral. "Perhaps there are deeper issues here," Sterling continued, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Perhaps even inherited mental instabilities that went undetected." That was the final twist to the knife. He wasn't just attacking her. He was desecrating her father's memory all over again, painting him as not only a failure, but as the source of her supposed madness. Evie felt a surge of white-hot rage, but she forced it down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in her chest. She had to see this through. The general's aide, seeing his boss had gone on the offensive, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Sir, we can have her escorted for a full psychological evaluation immediately. For her own safety, of course." "An excellent suggestion, Major," Sterling boomed. "Her behavior clearly indicates she is a security risk. We will have her removed." The isolation was now complete. She stood alone in a circle of judgment, the full weight of the military command structure pressing down on her. The irony was suffocating. She was being publicly disgraced on the same kind of parade ground where her father had once stood with honor, facing the same kind of systematic character assassination from the very same man. History was repeating itself, but Evie knew something they didn't. This time, it would have a different ending. The world seemed to slow down. The sound of the wind, the distant traffic, the restless crowd, it all faded into a low hum. All Evie could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart and her father's last words echoing in her mind. For the truth. Colonel Miller, her direct commanding officer, broke from the line of senior officers. He was a good man, a man who had seen Evie's potential and championed her career. His face was etched with genuine concern and disbelief. He moved to her side, his voice a low, urgent whisper meant only for her. "Evie, what are you doing?" he pleaded. "Listen to me. Salute him. Just salute him and we can fix this. We'll say it was a momentary lapse, the stress, anything. But you have to do it now. Think of your future. Don't let a man like Sterling destroy everything you and your father worked for." His words were a lifeline, an offer of retreat from the brink. For a fleeting second, she considered it. The warmth of a continued career, the respect of her peers, the quiet life she could have. It was all there, just one simple, soul-crushing salute away. She looked at Colonel Miller, a man she respected, and saw the genuine pain in his eyes. This was the hardest part, disappointing the ones who believed in her. But then she looked back at General Sterling. His face was smug, confident in his victory. He saw her hesitation, saw Colonel Miller's intervention, and mistook it for surrender. He had won. He had broken another reed. That look was all it took to extinguish any thought of retreat. Her resolve hardened from a diamond into something unbreakable. She gave Colonel Miller a look of quiet apology. "I can't, sir," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "You'll understand soon." Sterling's patience snapped. He had toyed with her long enough. "Enough of this," he roared, his voice cracking like a whip across the parade ground. He gestured sharply to the two military police officers standing by. "Arrest her. Get her out of my sight." The moment had come. The two MPs, their faces grim and uncomfortable, began to walk toward her. Their boots crunched on the gravel with a heavy, final rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Each step was a nail being hammered into the coffin of her career. One of them unclipped a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The sunlight caught the steel, sending a cold, silver glint across the field. This was it, the point of no return. Once those cuffs closed around her wrists, her chance would be gone. The evidence she had spent years gathering would be buried in a sea of bureaucracy. Her father's name would remain stained forever. She took a deep, steadying breath, the thin mountain air filling her lungs. It felt like the last breath of her old life. Just as the lead MP's fingers were about to close around her arm, Evie took one deliberate step forward. The movement was so unexpected it made both officers pause. She wasn't looking at them. Her stormy eyes were locked on General Sterling. The entire parade ground held its breath. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried across the unnatural silence with chilling precision. Colonel Nathan Reed. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into a frozen lake, the ripples spreading instantly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for 15 years. General Sterling froze mid-gesture. The smug, triumphant look on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. Evie didn't give him a moment to recover. Operation Crimson Sand, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Cadora Valley. Classified mission date August 14th, 2010. You falsified the after-action report, sir. Report number 7-3B. You blamed the intelligence failure on Colonel Reed, but the bad intel came from your own source, a source you failed to properly vet. Sterling's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His aide stared at him, bewildered by his commander's sudden paralysis. You transferred the 2 platoon leaders who could have contradicted your story. Evie went on, her recitation as methodical as a legal brief. Captain Evans to a desk job in Germany. Lieutenant Sanchez to a training post in Alaska. You buried them, just like you buried the truth. She reached inside her dress uniform jacket. For a heart-stopping second, the MPs tensed, thinking she was reaching for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out 2 items. The first was a letter, its paper yellowed and creased with age. This is my father's last letter to me. In it, he details the orders you gave him verbally, orders that directly contradicted the written ones, orders that led his men into an ambush. She then held up the second item. It was a small, encrypted USB drive hanging from a simple silver chain she wore around her neck, previously hidden beneath her uniform. And this, she said, holding it up for all to see, contains copies of the original communications logs I acquired, the ones you thought were destroyed. It has sworn, notarized affidavits from both Evans and Sanchez. It has your signature on transfer orders dated just 48 hours after the mission failure. It has everything. She took another step forward, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. You didn't just end his career, General. You let him die in disgrace to save your own. You built your stars on my father's bones. The general stared at the USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. His hands began to tremble, the large signet ring rattling against the podium. The decorated monster was gone. In his place stood a small, terrified man, his past finally cornered in the bright, unforgiving sunlight. The silence that descended upon the parade ground was absolute. It was heavier than any command, more profound than any salute. It was the sound of a truth long buried, finally breaking the surface. General Sterling stood as if turned to stone, the weight of 15 years of lies crashing down on him in a single, devastating moment. Colonel Miller, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning outrage, stepped forward and took the yellowed letter and the USB drive from Evie's outstretched hand. He looked from the evidence to the shattered man at the podium, and his expression hardened into one of pure disgust. He had been serving under a man capable of the ultimate betrayal. With the evidence now in the hands of legitimate authority, Evie's posture changed. The rigid defiance softened, replaced by the bearing of a soldier whose mission was complete. She turned to face Colonel Miller, the man who had tried to save her. She drew herself up to her full height, brought her right hand up in a flawless, crisp arc, and rendered a perfect salute. Her fingers snapped to her brow with precision. The gesture was electric. It wasn't for Sterling. It was for Colonel Miller. It was for the uniform, for the institution, for the honor she had fought to restore. It was a declaration that her fight was not with the army, but with the corruption that had infested it. Colonel Miller, understanding everything in that single moment, returned the salute with equal gravity. The fallout was swift and decisive. The formal investigation validated every piece of evidence Evie had presented. General Sterling was court-martialed, stripped of his rank and honors, and sentenced for conduct unbecoming an officer, perjury, and the deliberate framing of Colonel Nathan Reed. Her father's record was posthumously cleared. His dishonorable discharge was reversed, and his name was restored. The family received the benefits and honors that had been stolen from them. On a quiet autumn day, Evie stood before the memorial wall at Fort Carson as a new name was unveiled, etched into the black granite among the other heroes, Colonel Nathan Reed. Evie's career survived. Her actions, initially seen as insubordination, were officially recognized as a justified and necessary act to uphold the Army's highest values, truth and justice. She continued to serve, her reputation transformed. She was no longer just a brilliant officer. She was a symbol. A legend whispered in barracks and briefing rooms. A story of a captain who faced down a general and won, not with a weapon, but with a name. Evelyn Stand raises a powerful question. Where is the line between duty and morality? What would you have done in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And please, let's comment with respect for everyone's perspective, especially for those who serve. If this story of courage moved you, Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about heroes who fight for truth, no matter the cost.